Is there an aspect of sexuality you know you should discuss with your kids, but you just really don't want to? If so, stay tuned. I have 5 tips to help you tackle those tough sex talks. I'm Nadine, Thornhill, sexuality educator. If you have been hanging around here for a while, you know that I like to talk a lot about the importance of having open, honest conversations with our kids and teens about sexuality. But what happens when we know we should be having a conversation about something, but we just really don't know where to start, or the thought of having the conversation just makes us feel so awkward or anxious or nervous? I have 5 tips that can help you if there's an aspect of sexuality that you are struggling to discuss with your kids, or you're just not sure how to get the conversation started. My first tip is to take your time. Most parents and caregivers that I talk to have at least one topic that just makes them super uncomfortable, and they kind of want to avoid it even though they know that they should be talking about it. Even I have topics like that. One of them is internet porn. I know all of the things that I should be saying. I even made a video about it, which I will link to above. But despite all of that, when it comes to having the conversations with my own kid, I feel really uncomfortable, I feel awkward, I get really nervous, and I found that when I've tried to dive into a conversation about internet porn just spontaneously, it almost never goes well. The silver lining of those messy talks is that I've learned that I can have better conversations with my kid if I take some time to sort myself out, calm myself down, and really think ahead of time about what it is I want to get across and how I want to communicate that. If there is a topic that seems daunting to you, you can take some time to work through it on your own before you bring it to your kid. You can even rehearse a little bit. So I'm not talking about, writing out a script and then learning lines like in a play, but you might want to sort of run what you're planning on saying by, a friend or a partner, or you could just even say it to yourself in the mirror a couple of times so that when you do go and talk to your kid, you've had a chance to work out some of the kinks and, just saying the words feels a little bit more familiar. Now, that's great for a planned discussion, but what do you do if your child or your teen asks you a question about something that makes you feel uncomfortable? You can still take some time. I think sometimes as parents, we feel pressure, or we have this idea that if our kids ask us a question about sexuality and we want to be open and honest, that we have to answer the question right there on the spot. If you don't feel ready to answer that question, you can say, hey, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked. I'm not ready to answer it right now, so give me an hour, a day, a couple of days, whatever it is you think you need, and I will get back to you. And then you can actually tell your kid when you two can sit down or get together and talk about their question. My second tip is to take one thing at a time. Something else that I've learned is that when there's a topic that makes me uncomfortable, it's better if I limit myself to 1 or at most 2 key bits of information in any conversation with my kid. So if we're talking about internet porn, during the thinking phase, the processing phase, I might decide that right now, what's really important to me is to get across the idea that sex in pornography is often different than sex in real life. You may have heard or read advice from experts saying that having one big sex talk with kids is less ideal than having several shorter conversations over the course of their childhood and adolescence. And that is advice that I 100% agree with. I'm going to take it a step further and say that I don't necessarily think having one talk about one topic related to sexuality is ideal, and that most of these topics are complex. There's a lot of information, and so you can break that down even further into sort of subtopics, and that You can limit yourself to just one subtopic in a conversation, because trying to cover like all of sexting or all of pregnancy or all of sexual health, all of orientation or gender in one topic, that's a lot of pressure too. It's a lot of information for you to get across. It's a lot of information for your kid to process. If you as the adult are feeling nervous or stressed or anxious, or it's just a difficult topic for you to tackle, it's probably going to be a little bit more manageable if you plan for, a quick 10 to 15 minute conversation about some aspect of a topic, as opposed to trying to steel yourself for like a 2-3 hour discussion. My third tip is to check out sex ed resources that are meant for kids and teens. Something that can be a big challenge is talking to our kids about topics that we didn't learn about until we were adults. One topic where this seems to come up a lot is gender identity. Now, if you're someone who's of my same generation and you grew up in this part of the world, it's possible that, like me, when you were a kid, you were taught that boys have penises, girls have vagina, that's it, end of story, nothing to see here, move along. If, like me, you were a grown-up when you learned that gender identity is a social construct that is not inherently connected to sexual biology, and that there are people who are androgynous, trans, genderqueer, non-binary, and hold other identities, that information was likely presented to you using more sophisticated adult language. And that's true of a lot of other aspects of sexuality as well. What that can mean is that we may struggle when we try to talk about these things with our kids because we literally don't know the words, because we never received the information in child-friendly language. But there are shows and books and websites that are geared towards kids, and using those as a reference can help you build that child-friendly vocabulary. I host a web series called Sex Ed School with Eva Bloom. I'm going to put a link to it down below. And in that series, we are talking to a classroom of 9 to 12-year-olds. When you watch that series, you will get a sense of how you would discuss some of these topics with younger people. A show like that, or a kid-friendly book, or websites for kids, you can explore those with your kids. That's a way of giving them the information. But I also encourage you to explore them on your own, again, so you can start building kid-friendly language and kid-friendly vocabulary to talk about certain aspects of sexuality that you may have only learned about when you were a grown-up. That brings me to tip number 4, which I basically just said in tip number 3, which is to use media as your jumping off point to have these conversations. So we just talked about media that is specifically designed for sex education, but you can also just use the media that you consume normally. So, TV shows, movies, books, magazines, billboards, social media. There's media all around us to spark sort of more organic conversations about how things like relationships, families, gender identity, how those things are portrayed and how they may be similar or different from what we experience in real life. In our house, we usually have one show that we watch together as a family. At the time that I'm filming this, our show is Schitt's Creek. Big ups for Canadian content. Schitt's Creek is a show that gives us a lot of opportunities to talk about relationships, classism, sexual orientation, friendship, breakups. So we get a lot out of Schitt's Creek. Love that show. If you know me in real life, you probably know that I am a big fan of Lizzo, and because my kid is older, they're almost a teenager now, I'm comfortable basically letting them listen to the music that I listen to, so I often have Lizzo on in the car. And again, Lizzo provides a fantastic opportunity to talk about relationships and breakups, body image, race, racism, all sorts of great things that just come from listening to tunes in the car. If your child is younger and you have more restrictions on what sort of media they're consuming, then you can still use their kid-friendly TV shows and movies and books to talk about things like, Orientation, because usually there are depictions of families, or you can still talk about relationships, what makes a relationship healthy or unhealthy, because we often still see things like romance depicted in kid-family media. And you can talk about gender, because the characters are usually gendered in some way. One final note about media, I think it's fantastic if everything that you watch and read and consume in terms of media reflects your values. The reality is that a lot of us, I know I enjoy media that has problematic elements or elements that don't reflect my values. I personally think it's okay to let kids also enjoy entertainment that may not be 100% aligned with your values as a parent or your values as a family, but I also think that it can be useful to have some conversations with them about why it's different to enjoy something in terms of entertainment versus using it as an example of how you would want to behave in your real life. And my last tip is to ask your kids what they think. I've probably said it at least 100 times on this channel now. Asking your kids open-ended questions about sexuality is a great way to kick off a conversation. By asking questions, you're letting them know that you care about what they know and think. You're letting them know that they have a stake in this conversation, that it's not just you lecturing them. And from a strategic standpoint, you're getting them to talk first, which can give you a sense of what it is they know, what misconceptions they have, and you can probably use their response to your question as a jumping off point for what you want to say next about whatever topic you're discussing. This is also a good strategy for dealing with unexpected questions. So say if you're taking your kid to basketball practice and they suddenly ask you, what's a G-spot? You can come back at them with, what do you think a G-spot is? And again, their response may give you a sense of what they do and don't know already, but it also gives you at least a few seconds to take a deep breath and figure out how you're going to respond next, even if you want that response to be, hey, great question, I'll talk to you about this later. I'm of the firm belief that if a kid is old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to get some sort of answer. So if your kid asks you what a G-spot is, take, an hour or two or a day or two, but your kid is ready to hear about G-spots. So remember that if you're making a consistent effort to keep communication about sexuality open in your family, that in a lot of ways is more important than any single conversation about sexuality you may have. You're teaching your kids that you're willing to talk to them about sexuality, that you want them to have information, and that even when you feel some kind of way about these conversations, it's still okay to talk about it. In the comments below, let me know some of your tips for tackling these talks with your kids. Or you can let me know if there are certain subjects that you feel especially nervous or uncomfortable discussing in your family. That's all for now. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye.